The rain was cold that night, the kind that soaks through your jacket and into your bones. A man stood outside a glowing nightclub door, his hands shaking, not from the weather, but from fear. He whispered 2 words to himself, barely breathing, "I'm so sorry," not knowing that those words were about to change his life forever. Sometimes, kindness doesn't come wrapped in comfort. Sometimes it arrives when you're at your lowest, standing in the dark, afraid of the person behind a door you never wanted to knock on. And sometimes, the person you fear the most is the one who teaches you the biggest lesson of all. Before we begin, if you enjoy emotional stories that remind you of the power of kindness and second chances, please take a moment to subscribe, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. You're watching Heartfelt Moments, where real emotions meet meaningful stories. Mark Davis never imagined his life would turn out this way. At 38 years old, he was a single dad raising a 7-year-old daughter named Lily. Her mother had passed away 3 years earlier after a sudden illness, leaving Mark to learn how to braid hair, pack lunches, and be both mom and dad overnight. Mark worked 2 jobs. During the day, he cleaned offices. At night, he worked security at a private club downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, barely. Some nights, he came home so tired he fell asleep sitting on the edge of Lily's bed while reading her a story. The club was owned by a young entrepreneur named Ethan Cole. Ethan was only 26, sharp-dressed, confident, and already successful in ways Mark couldn't imagine. Most employees respected Ethan, but Mark feared him. Not because Ethan was cruel, but because he was powerful, and Mark felt replaceable. One evening, Mark's world nearly fell apart. Earlier that day, Lily had developed a high fever at school. Mark rushed her to the clinic, waiting hours before learning she had a bad infection. The doctor said she'd be okay, but she needed rest and medication. Mark spent his last savings on the prescription. By the time he checked his phone, he saw several missed calls from the club manager. Mark's shift had started an hour ago. Panic filled his chest. If he lost this job, he didn't know how he would pay rent. He left Lily with a kind neighbor and rushed downtown, still wearing his worn jacket, rain soaking his shoes. When he arrived, the club was already busy. Music thumped from inside. People laughed as they walked past him. Mark took a deep breath and walked to the back entrance, the door reserved for staff. He knocked. The door opened slowly. And there stood Ethan Cole. Not the manager. Not a supervisor. The owner. Mark froze. Ethan looked surprised, then confused. "Mark? You were supposed to be on shift an hour ago." Mark's throat tightened. His mind raced. Excuses felt useless. His pride collapsed. I'm so sorry," Mark said, his voice shaking. "My daughter was sick. I didn't know what else to do." Ethan stared at him in silence. The music from inside faded into a dull hum. For a long moment, Mark expected anger. A lecture. Maybe even the words, "You're fired." Instead, Ethan asked softly, "Is she okay?" Mark blinked. "What?" "Your daughter," Ethan said again. "Is she okay?" Mark swallowed hard. "She will be. She needs me." Ethan nodded slowly. He stepped aside and motioned Mark inside, but not toward the club floor. He led him into a quiet office. "Sit down," Ethan said. Mark's hands trembled as he sat. He felt small. Embarrassed. Ashamed. Ethan leaned against the desk. "Why didn't you call me directly?" Mark looked down. I didn't think you'd care. I thought I'd just lose my job." Ethan exhaled and rubbed his face. "Mark, do you know why I started this club?" Mark shook his head. "My dad," Ethan said, "worked 2 jobs too. Missed birthdays. Missed dinners. And one day, he got fired because he chose me over work." Mark looked up. "He never complained," Ethan continued. But I promised myself that if I ever owned a business, I wouldn't forget what that felt like. Silence filled the room again, but this time, it felt different. Ethan opened a drawer and pulled out a small envelope. He slid it across the desk. This is an advance on next month's pay. Take tomorrow off. Be with your daughter. Mark stared at the envelope, his vision blurring. I can't. You can, Ethan said gently. And you should. Tears rolled down Mark's face. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. I'm so sorry, he whispered again. Ethan shook his head. Don't be. You're doing your best. That matters. That night, Mark went home and sat beside Lily's bed, holding her small hand. For the first time in months, his chest felt lighter. Weeks passed. Lily recovered. Mark returned to work with renewed energy. But something had changed. Ethan didn't just greet him as an employee anymore. He asked about Lily. About school. About life. One afternoon, Ethan called Mark into the office again. I need a head of night security, Ethan said. Someone responsible. Someone I trust. Mark's heart pounded. You mean, me? Ethan smiled. Yes. And it comes with better hours. Mark accepted, overwhelmed with gratitude. Years later, Mark would tell Lily this story when she was old enough to understand. He would tell her how kindness isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's a quiet decision to listen. To care. To give someone a chance when they expect judgment instead. And Lily would grow up believing that success means nothing if you forget to be human. Because one rainy night, a young boss opened a door, not just to a club, but to compassion. And a single dad learned that kindness can change everything. So if you ever have the power to help, remember this story. You never know how much someone is carrying. One small act of kindness could be the moment that saves them. And maybe, just maybe, it will inspire them to pass that kindness on.